Hey there, come closer to the fire and listen to what the newest models found when researchers fed Malta into the machine. They gave the artificial intelligence old excavation maps, temple measurements, acoustic scans, folklore records, missing bone reports, and geological models of the Mediterranean seafloor. And the pattern that came back was not neat, not comforting, and not easy to place inside the official timeline. The data pointed to an island whose first chapters may not be missing by accident. It pointed to temples that appear too complete, stones that carry too much silence, and tunnels beneath the limestone where the story seems to move downward instead of back in time. If this quiet journey into forbidden history keeps you listening, leave a like and subscribe so the fire can stay lit for the next mystery. Now dim the room a little. Let your breathing slow. Let the candlelight soften the edges of the walls. We are going to Malta tonight. Not the bright postcard island of blue water and sunlit stone, but the older Malta, the deeper Malta, the island that seems to be sleeping on top of something it cannot fully explain. Imagine the Mediterranean at dusk. The sea is darkening from blue into iron. The limestone cliffs hold the last warmth of the day. Wind comes off the water with salt in it, moving through dry grass, over temple ruins, along walls that have stood longer than most kingdoms have names. The stones are pale at sunset, but as evening lowers, they begin to look heavier. They do not glow. They wait. That waiting is the first feeling Malta gives you. There are places where history feels orderly. A settlement becomes a village. A village becomes a town. Tools improve. Houses grow larger. Ritual spaces become more complex. One layer teaches the next. You can see the ladder. Malta refuses that comfort. Here, the story seems to begin in the middle. According to the standard timeline, the first farming settlers arrived from Sicily around 5900 before the Common Era. They were Neolithic people, crossing water with seeds, animals, trees, and the stubborn courage it takes to settle an island. That part is already impressive. But then, some centuries later, the temples appear, and they do not look like a young culture learning slowly. They look like conclusions. The AI model flagged this first, not as proof of a lost civilization, because careful research does not move that quickly, but as a structural anomaly. The neural network compared architectural sequences from Egypt, Anatolia, Britain, Sicily, Sardinia, and the wider Mediterranean. It searched for prototypes, early mistakes, local experiments, repeated learning stages, and patterns of gradual improvement. In most regions, the curve is visible. Crude forms come first. Refinement arrives later. Malta was different. The temples rise with a strange confidence. Curved chambers, large stone blocks, carefully planned internal spaces, possible solar alignments, heavy thresholds, trilithon doorways, ritual areas arranged with intention. The earliest examples already carry mastery. The machine did not understand wonder. It understood sequence. And the sequence did not behave. That is the quiet terror of data. It does not need to be dramatic. It only needs to show that the expected pattern is absent. The source describes this as history starting in the wrong direction. That phrase stays with me. It feels exactly right. In Malta, the beginning is too polished. There are no obvious failed attempts scattered across the island. No rough ancestral version that says, "Here, this is where they learned." No long visible path from simple enclosure to monumental architecture. The stones simply appear, already speaking a mature language. Cultures do not usually begin with fluency. They stammer first. They try. They fail. They build too small. They build too weak. They learn what collapses. They rebuild. The landscape keeps the evidence of that struggle. But on Malta, the struggle is hidden, erased, submerged, or never recorded where we can reach it. Recently, researchers used computer models to compare the temples with known Neolithic toolkits and island resource limits. The result was not a clean answer. It was a set of pressures. Malta had limited timber, no metal tools at the time, a population that seems too small for the most ambitious labor estimates. Blocks weighing many tons. Interiors shaped with careful control. A ritual architecture with no clear surrounding tradition. One pressure alone can be explained. Together, they begin to bend the story. Stand with me at a temple site as night comes on. The air cools quickly after sunset. Your hand rests on limestone that was warm a moment ago and is now giving its heat back to the dark. The surface is rough in some places, smoothed in others by weather, time, hands, and feet long gone. Through a doorway, the chamber curves inward like the inside of a thought. The opening is taller than it needs to be. The stone above it seems to press down with the weight of centuries. Nothing here feels accidental. The official explanation says early farmers built these places through remarkable ingenuity. That may be true in part. Human ingenuity is not a small thing. But the source asks why that ingenuity has no visible childhood on the island. Why does the temple culture appear as though it inherited an older skill? Why does it vanish later without passing the same architectural mastery forward? Why does the island stand alone? The AI did not answer those questions like a prophet. It ranked them like a researcher. It placed Malta among sites where development appears compressed, interrupted, or inherited. It compared temple sequences and concluded that the missing stages are statistically unusual. Again, not impossible. Archaeology is full of gaps. Sea levels rise. Soft materials decay. Sites vanish under towns, fields, roads, and water. But Malta has too many missing pieces in the same direction. The temples do not resemble those of Sicily closely enough to feel like ordinary cultural transfer. They do not echo North African forms in a simple way. They do not fit comfortably with Eastern Mediterranean patterns. They seem local, yet too complete. Isolated, yet too knowledgeable. Rooted in the island, yet haunted by something that may have come before. The most cautious scholars say we should keep looking. Earlier sites may still be buried. Submerged coastal settlements may lie under the Mediterranean. Erosion may have removed crucial evidence. Those explanations are reasonable. They are also incomplete. They explain loss, but not the feeling of sudden perfection. The artificial intelligence added another layer by modeling Ice Age coastlines. Before the seas rose, Malta may have belonged to a different landscape, larger, more connected, less isolated. What is now an island may once have been part of a broader prehistoric world where people moved across exposed land or shorter sea passages. If older communities lived on coastlines now drowned, then the first chapters of Malta may not be missing from the island because they were never inland. They may be under the sea. Picture that slowly. A shoreline that no longer exists. A settlement where there is now blue water. Fires burning where fish now pass. Stone workers, ritual spaces, graves, paths, tools, songs, all lowered by time beneath the Mediterranean. The sea is a beautiful archivist, but a cruel one. It preserves by hiding. It hides by drowning. A geological model cannot prove a lost culture. It can only show where one might have stood before water took the evidence away. But when those drowned possibilities are placed beside the sudden mastery of the temples, the silence around Malta begins to feel less empty. It begins to feel covered. This is why the island feels as if someone tore out the first chapters. Maybe the chapters were stone and washed away. Maybe they were bone and disappeared into storage. Maybe they were in tunnels, now sealed. Maybe they were never written because the people who knew them vanished before writing arrived. Every possibility has its own shadow. The temples above ground are the first clue, but not the deepest. Walk across the island in imagination. The names come like old stones in the mouth. Gandija, Manaidra, Hagarkim, Darksien. Each site carries its own stillness. Each one looks towards sky, sea, or land with a confidence that feels older than explanation. Visitors often describe a heaviness near them, a silence that does not behave like ordinary quiet. Perhaps that is only the mind responding to age. Perhaps it is the shape of stone and chamber creating a mood. Or perhaps deep places always press on us when we stand too close to unanswered questions. I do not think mystery requires fantasy to become powerful. Sometimes the facts are enough. A small island, a sudden temple culture, massive stones, no obvious prototypes, no clear descendants, stories of giant builders, reports of missing bones, a labyrinth beneath the ground, a chamber where sound vibrates through the body at 110 hertz. An underworld mapped one way in old records and another way today. The AI system did not invent these details. It gathered them, sorted them, compared them, and showed that they cluster around the same fault line. Malta is not strange in one place. It is strange in layers. The first layer is the surface, the temples under sun and moon. The second is myth, the old villagers saying giants built what ordinary hands could not. The third is bone, reports of skulls that no longer sit where researchers expect them to be. The fourth is the Hypogeum, descending into limestone, where stone begins to speak back. Tonight, we begin at the surface. because every descent needs a threshold. The sea darkens. The wind moves. The temple stones cool. Somewhere below modern streets, under houses, traffic, and ordinary life, the carved chambers wait in their constant temperature and their heavy silence. The island seems small from above, but beneath the skin of limestone, it becomes larger, more secret, more difficult to place in time. You are standing at the edge of a story that refuses to begin where it should. The accepted timeline says farmers came first, then temples. The stones seem to whisper that something came before the farmers, or came with them already complete. And the newest AI analysis, by cross-referencing geology, architecture, acoustic data, old maps, and folklore, does not close the mystery. It opens it wider. It suggests that Malta may not be an isolated oddity, but a surviving fragment of an older pattern, one that later history tried to simplify because the alternative was too difficult to hold. The night around the temple deepens. The limestone doorway is black now. It looks less like an entrance and more like a mouth holding back a name. You listen for surf. You hear wind. You hear the dry grass. You hear your own breath, small against the stones. And under all of it, almost too low to notice, you feel the downward pull. The surface mystery is not enough. The island wants us beneath it. The old villagers did not begin with charts. They began with a woman carrying stones. Her name was Sansuna, or Sunsuna, depending on the village, depending on the mouth that told the story, depending on how long the tale had traveled before it reached the listener. She was said to be enormous, taller and stronger than ordinary people, able to lift stones that would defeat a team of modern workers. She crossed the island with megaliths on her shoulders as calmly as another woman might carry baskets of grain. And then she placed them. That detail matters. The story does not say she only threw the stones. It says she placed them. She carried, chose, balanced, arranged. Strength alone does not build a temple. Strength can move weight, but knowledge gives the weight a place to rest. When the AI model was trained on folklore clusters from Malta, Sardinia, the Balearic Islands, the Levant, and other regions with megalithic structures, it found a repeated pattern. Giant stories gather where later people inherit stonework too large, too old, or too strange to explain. This does not prove that giants walked the earth. It does show that the human mind often preserves an architectural shock by turning it into a body. Stones too large become builders too large. Knowledge too old becomes a race before our race. That is not childish. That is memory trying to survive without records. Come with me now to a Maltese village before modern lights. The night is low and warm. The sea is somewhere beyond the fields, heard more than seen. A small fire burns in a courtyard or near a doorway. Children sit close because stories are warmer when they are frightening. An elder points toward the darkness where the ancient stones rise, and says the builders were not like us. Not gods. Not spirits. People, but larger. That is the strange tone of the Maltese traditions. Sansuna is not always described as a divine being floating above the world. She is given earthly details. She walks. She works. She eats. One version says she ate broad beans while carrying or placing the stones. Broad beans. So ordinary. So domestic. So oddly human that it becomes more haunting than thunder. A purely invented giant might eat clouds, or sheep by the dozen, or the moon. Sansuna eats beans. That small detail is the kind that makes researchers pause. Folklorists have often noted that when extraordinary tales preserve ordinary habits, they may contain a blurred memory of real social contact, real observation, hora real cultural rupture. Not proof. Never proof by itself, but a clue with dirt still under its nails. Imagine her at dusk, a tall figure moving across limestone ground, a massive block resting against her shoulder. The sea wind catches her hair. In one hand, perhaps, a small handful of beans. She eats as she works, practical as any laborer. Her steps press into dust. The stone does not sway wildly. She knows how to hold it. She knows where it is going. The story is impossible, and yet it feels less like a miracle than a memory stretched by time. That is why the newest narrative analysis did not dismiss the myth outright. It treated it as data of a different kind. The model cross-referenced variations of the Sansuna legend with temple locations, local place names, early ethnographic notes, and later descriptions of Gantia. The results showed that the giantess was not random decoration added to the temples. She was attached to the problem of construction. The story exists because the stones needed a builder. Gantia itself means giant tower. The name carries the old explanation inside it. Even before the site was studied with lasers, drones, ground surveys, and archaeological typologies, villagers already felt that ordinary hands did not fit the scale. The name was an answer, a rough answer, perhaps, a mythic answer, but an answer shaped by looking. Stand there in imagination, beneath those enormous limestone walls. The blocks rise above you, pale and heavy. Some are longer than a person is tall. Some seem less placed than planted, as if the island grew them upward from its own bone. The doorway stands with a solemn patience. The internal chambers curve inward like the body of some sleeping creature. The ground holds the marks of many feet, but not the feet of those who first began the work. The AI reconstruction mapped visitor paths, doorway heights, altar position, chamber widths, and floor wear from multiple temple sites. It did not conclude that giants built them. It did suggest that some spatial proportions are unusual when compared with average Neolithic body sizes inferred from known populations. Doorways that feel tall, altars that stand high, corridors that move with a generosity not always needed for smaller bodies. These details are not verdicts. They are pressures. Again, Malta gives pressure rather than proof. The source asks whether the oral traditions might preserve a memory of a people physically different from later inhabitants. Larger, stronger, or at least remembered that way because their works were larger and stronger. That possibility sits in the half-light between folklore and anthropology. We cannot pretend certainty. We can only follow the pattern. Malta is not alone. Across the Mediterranean and beyond, stories of large builders cling to megalithic remains. Sardinia has tombs linked in popular language to giants. The Balearic Islands remember stone lifters and older peoples. The Levant carries old accounts of peoples of great stature near ancient fortified places. In parts of the world far from Malta, early reports and local legends connect unusual bones, massive earthworks, and vanished builders. Some of these claims are unreliable. Some were exaggerated. Some were filtered through colonial imagination or bad record-keeping. But the repeated pairing is still worth noticing. Megaliths invite giant memory. The machine saw the recurrence. More importantly, it noticed where the recurrence becomes specific. A vague giant story can be symbolic. A giant builder associated with a named site, a named action, and ordinary habits begins to behave more like cultural residue. Sansuna carrying stones and eating broad beans is not the same as a dragon in a cloud. She has a task. She has a body. She belongs to an island. What kind of event would create such a memory? Perhaps early farmers arrived and found stones already standing. Perhaps the temples were built by their ancestors, but later generations forgot the techniques and made giants out of lost knowledge. Perhaps there were actual differences in stature between groups, enough for one population to remember another as unusually large. Perhaps the story compresses social difference, technological difference, and architectural awe into a single, enormous woman walking across the island. Myth is often efficient that way. It carries many truths in one figure. The source leans toward the idea that Malta may have inherited traces of a population older than the known temple culture. Modern AI models cannot prove such a population. They can, however, test whether the official sequence leaves unexplained gaps. In Malta, those gaps remain large. If the first settlers truly came as simple farmers, where did the architectural knowledge arise? If the temple builders learned slowly, where are the learning stages? If the skills were local, why did later inhabitants not continue them? If they were imported, why are the same forms not found clearly in the place of origin? Each question is a stone added to the load. The myth of Sansuna carries that load more gracefully than a technical paper. She walks, and the contradictions move with her. Imagine the children listening by the fire. One asks how she lifted such stones. The elder shrugs. Perhaps because she was Sansuna. Because she was not like us. Because the world was different then. That answer is not scientific, but it preserves the essential difference. The builders belong to another order of ability. The danger is taking myth too literally. The opposite danger is dismissing it too quickly. A balanced listener does neither. A balanced listener lets the story stand as a witness, not a judge. The giantess is not evidence in the same way a dated bone is evidence. She is evidence that later people felt a break between themselves and the stones. She tells us that the temples were experienced as inherited mystery. She tells us that the builders had become alien to memory. The AI analysis also compared the language of giant traditions. It found that some myths speak of giants as chaotic beings, inimious, monsters, or symbolic forces. But Maltese stories often speak of them as builders, predecessors, inhabitants. That distinction matters. A monster threatens the present. A predecessor explains the past. Sansuna does not merely frighten. She accounts for architecture. This is why she belongs in the story. She is the bridge between stone and bone. The stone says, "Something difficult happened here." The myth says, "The difficult thing was done by beings unlike us." The missing bones will later ask whether any physical trace of such difference once existed. For now, stay with the giantess. See her not as a cartoon of size, but as a memory swollen by centuries. Her foot on limestone, her shoulder under weight, her hand guiding the block into place. The sound when stone meets stone. Not a crash, but a deep settling. Dust rising in the orange light. Broad beans in the palm. A village far in the future trying to remember why the walls are too large for the people who inherited them. The stories say she built. The archaeologists say farmers built. The stones say nothing, but their silence is not empty. Recently, a team using machine learning tested possible labor models for moving Maltese megaliths under Neolithic conditions. The model varied workforce size, slope, friction, rollers, sledges, rope strength, timber availability, and stone weight. Some simulations produced possible answers for smaller stones. The heaviest stones were another matter. They required either larger labor groups, more efficient techniques than the archaeological record confirms, or assumptions about materials that Malta may not have had in abundance. The result does not make Sansuna real. It makes the official story less simple. And that is where myth often returns, not as an answer, but as a pressure against simplification. The night grows deeper in our imagined village. The elder has finished speaking. The children are quiet now, looking toward the dark fields where the temple stones stand beyond the edge of firelight. The old story has done its work. It has made the stones feel alive. It has made the past feel populated. Outside, the real stones wait under stars. They do not need the story to exist, but the story gives them a shadow shaped like a body. In that shadow, the first major fracture opens. If the temples appear too advanced, and the myths say earlier larger beings built them, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Are there remains? Were there bones? Did anyone ever find bodies that made the stories seem less impossible? The source says yes. It says early excavators found skulls that did not fit the expected pattern. Elongated, robust, unusual. Reported in the Hypogeum and other sites. Then, over time, they disappeared into silence, lost, misclassified, removed, or denied. The fire beside us lowers. The giantess steps back into legend. The island turns under moonlight. And beneath the temples, where myth should end and evidence should begin, the bones begin to vanish. The stones of Malta do not ask to be believed. They only ask to be measured. That is what the new models did first. No legends, no candlelit stories, no giantess walking through the dark with beans in her palm. Just limestone blocks, dimensions, angles, doorway heights, chamber widths, estimated mass, friction, slope, tool limits, human labor models, and the stubborn numbers that remain when romance is taken away. The numbers were not peaceful. Researchers fed three-dimensional scans of the temples into advanced structural software, then let the artificial intelligence test thousands of possible construction sequences. It tried teams pulling stones on sledges. It tried rollers. It tried ramps. It tried wet clay tracks. It tried timber frames where timber could plausibly exist. It tried larger crews and smaller crews. It tested how many bodies might fit around a block without getting in one another's way. It asked how much force a rope could take before the whole plan became less like engineering and more like wishing. Some answers worked for some stones. Not all. That is the problem Malta keeps handing back. A smaller megalith can be explained by patient people, hard labor, clever use of terrain, and the kind of stubborn community effort that leaves no grand machinery behind. Human beings are very good at doing difficult things when ritual, memory, food, and obligation all pull in the same direction. But some blocks seem to push the model toward the edge of ordinary explanation, not beyond possibility. That would be too easy. Just to the place where the clean story starts to strain. Stand now at Gontija. The name itself carries the old suspicion. Giant tower. The walls rise in pale, uneven masses, not smooth like later stone architecture, not delicate, but powerful in a way that feels older than refinement. Some blocks are so large that standing beside them changes your scale. The body becomes a temporary thing. The stone becomes the main fact. It has weathered salt, sun, rain, footsteps, prayers, guesses, excavations, and the tired staring of visitors who do not know what to do with it. Your hand touches the surface. Limestone is not silent under the fingers. It is rough, pitted, warm in sun, cool in shade, grainy with old marine life turned to rock. It remembers the sea before it became a wall. The hand moves over it slowly, finding tool marks, breaks, weathered edges, places where the stone seems almost bitten by time. Nearby, wind passes through the doorway and carries the smell of dry grass and distant water. The block does not explain itself. It waits. The artificial intelligence compared Gontija with other megalithic sites. Stonehenge, much later, rises in a different landscape with a different cultural sequence. Göbekli Tepe, older in Anatolia, carries its own sudden complexity, but it belongs to a broader region with other signs of gathering, carving, and ritual. Egypt develops its monumental stone language through visible stages, mastabas, early pyramids, failures, refinements, then the great forms. Malta sits apart, earlier than many familiar giants of stone, smaller in landmass, rich in temple, poor in obvious developmental background. The machine did not feel awe. It highlighted discontinuity. That word sounds dry. In the dark, it is not dry at all. Discontinuity is a broken step on a staircase. You expect one level, and your foot finds air. Malta is that missing step. The temples are not random piles. Their plans often form rounded chambers, lobed spaces, carefully organized interiors. The walls curve as if the builders were shaping not only stone, but movement. A person entering does not simply walk straight in and out. The body is guided. Turn here. Pause here. Pass between uprights. Enter a chamber that opens like a womb, or a skull, or an ear listening to the sky. In some sites, alignments seem to connect with solar events, especially where light enters in ways that suggest attention to the heavens. Scholars debate details, and not every claim is accepted. Some alignments may be later interpretation. Some may be real. But the very debate tells us that these structures were not casual shelters. They were planned as ritual machines of stone, light, body, and sound. The source asks how a small island farming population reached such planning so quickly. The cautious answer is social complexity. Over generations, communities can organize labor around belief. They can move stone because stone matters. They can refine sacred architecture because ritual demands precision. They can do extraordinary things without kings, metal, or wheels. That answer deserves respect, but it does not erase the missing beginnings. The AI model placed special weight on absence. Absence is difficult for humans because we love visible evidence. A broken pot, a tool, a wall, a grave. But absence can have shape. If a culture builds huge temples, we expect traces of training. Earlier shrines, smaller prototypes, failed forms, half-learned methods. The machine searched for those steps across known Maltese archaeology and found too little to make a smooth line. Again, not impossible. Uneasy. Now imagine the building itself. Not the finished temple, but the day a stone moved. The block lies on the ground, whiter than a sleeping animal, pale with dust. Men and women gather around it. Ropes are twisted from plant fiber or hide. Rollers, if used, are placed with care. Though Malta's limited timber makes that a question in itself. A sledge may be dragged over prepared ground. The air is hot. Limestone dust clings to skin. A leader calls rhythm. Bodies lean. Feet press into dirt. Hands tighten. The rope bites into palms. The stone shifts. Only a little. A sound comes from beneath it. A grinding so deep it seems to wake the ground. The workers stop. Adjust. Breathe. Try again. The stone moves another handspan. Hours pass. Perhaps days. Perhaps the movement is seasonal. Ritual. Communal. Slow enough that the stone becomes not an object, but an event. The high altars trouble the story too. In some spaces, ritual features seem placed at heights that invite speculation. Were they simply meant to elevate offerings? Were platforms, steps, or perishable furniture once present? Were the builders taller than the people whose remains we know? Were later visitors misreading incomplete architecture? All of these remain possible. The source leans toward larger bodies or different ritual needs, but certainty would be dishonest. The AI did not solve the altar question. It mapped proportion. It compared human movement inside the temples with estimated Neolithic body sizes. It simulated lines of sight from different heights. It tested how light would enter chambers from various eye levels. The results did not prove giant builders, but they did show that some interiors behave differently depending on body scale. A taller participant sees some sight lines more naturally. A smaller participant may need platforms. Platforms leave little trace if made of wood or other perishable material. Or no platforms were needed because the ritual was not meant for ordinary eye level. The stones keep the ambiguity. A doorway can be too tall for one reason or another. A corridor can be wide for processions. Symbols, acoustics, air, or larger bodies. An altar can be high because gods are above, or because the hands that served it were higher. The mystery is not one clue. It is the way many clues lean in the same direction. Then there is the stone surface itself. Some walls are rough outside, smoother within. Interior shaping suggests care for experience. The person inside is meant to feel enclosed, guided, perhaps even changed. The chambers gather sound. They gather shadow. They gather breath. The builders understood more than stacking. They understood atmosphere. This is why comparisons matter, but only to a point. Stonehenge has its own horizon drama. Göbekli Tepe has pillars carved with animals from a world waking into ritual complexity. Egypt has pyramids that climb from royal death into cosmic order. Malta has inwardness. Its temples curve. They hold. They seem less like monuments to be seen from afar and more like interiors built to transform those who pass through them. The source suggests that the architecture itself may preserve the needs of another population. Larger, older, more advanced, or simply different. Official archaeology tends to explain the structures through local Neolithic development. Both views try to answer the same pressure. The stones are too intentional to be accidental, too early to be comfortable, too isolated to be easy. Recently, the AI was also given transport terrain models, reconstructed prehistoric paths, and stone source locations. It calculated routes where heavy blocks could move with the least resistance. Some routes made sense. Others ran into slopes, soft ground, limited space, and logistical strain. The temples were not built in impossible places, but they were not built by laziness. Whoever moved these stones understood the island physically. They knew where weight could travel. That kind of knowledge can vanish. A technique taught orally can disappear in a single broken chain. A society can collapse, migrate, starve, or change belief. And suddenly, children no longer learn what their grandparents knew. Later, people walk among the stones and say giants did it, because the human method has fallen out of memory. This may be all the giant means. Lost technique. But even that is profound. A lost technique is a ghost without bones. The sun is gone now from Gantia. The stones stand under moonlight. Their shadows are large, soft, edged, almost alive. You look up at a block above the entrance and feel its weight not only as mass, but as time. Someone raised it. Someone knew how. Someone believed the raising mattered enough to spend hunger, muscle, season, and risk. The more closely the stones are measured, the more they seem to lead downward. The temples call for builders. The myths supply giants. The logistics ask for missing knowledge. The proportions hint at bodies, platforms, or rituals we do not yet understand. And then, as if the island knew exactly where the question would go next, the story turns from stone to bone. Because if the builders were different, if the legend remembers something more than imagination, if the temples stand at the end of a lost sequence, then somewhere there should have been remains. Skulls, skeletons, measurements, burial records, boxes in old stores, photographs, casts, excavation notes. The source says those traces were found. Then the silence around them became heavier than the stones. Bone is quieter than stone. Stone resists. Stone sits in the sun, towers over the visitor, refuses to be packed neatly into a drawer. Bone is different. Bone can be mislabeled, reburied, broken, moved, warped by damp, removed for study and never returned to the shelf where it began. Bone depends on paper, on catalog numbers, on careful hands, on institutions remembering what they promised to remember. That is why the missing bones of Malta feel so disturbing. The source speaks of early reports from the Hypogeum and temple sites, especially from excavations in the early 20th century, when archaeologists and officials were still trying to understand what lay beneath the island. Thousands of human remains were found in the underground complex. Many were ordinary in the archaeological sense, though no human remain is ordinary to the person it once was. But among the reports were claims of unusual skulls, elongated skulls, robust skulls, skulls with unusual features, skulls that some writers claimed did not fit easy categories. Here the ground becomes uncertain, and we must walk carefully. Official archaeology today does not accept the strongest versions of these claims. Some researchers say the anomalous skull stories have been exaggerated, misunderstood, or built from poor documentation. Others argue that some skulls were indeed described as unusual, but that later access became difficult. Records were incomplete, and remains were lost, reclassified, or unavailable for proper study. The truth may be less cinematic than conspiracy, but still troubling. Poor cataloging can erase evidence. So can war. So can institutional embarrassment. So can a drawer moved from one building to another without anyone understanding what was inside. So can the desire to make a clean story out of a dirty archive. Recently, researchers fed old excavation references, museum inventories, published remarks, newspaper accounts, and surviving photographs into an AI archive model. The machine did what tired human eyes often struggle to do. It connected repeated phrases across scattered documents. It found descriptions of elongated skull forms. It found mentions of unusual cranial features. It traced where certain remains were reportedly held. Then, where the chain becomes unclear, the output was not a smoking gun. It was a map of vanishing. A map of references that lead toward empty space. Imagine an old museum storeroom. Wooden shelves. Dust on boxes. Handwritten labels fading toward brown. A clerk or curator in the 1920s lifting a lid, finding bone wrapped in paper, perhaps marked only by sight. Trench, chamber, year. The room smells of old wood, lime dust, and time. A skull rests in weak light. Its shape seems long, unfamiliar, perhaps simply deformed by cultural practice, perhaps natural variation, perhaps something else. Someone notes it. Someone photographs it. Someone moves it for study. Then decades pass. The label loosens. A war interrupts. Collections shift. Records change language. System, building, priority. A later researcher asks to see the skull. The answer comes back soft and fatal. Not available. Lost. Unlocated. No record. The source treats this pattern as central to the Malta mystery. If there were unusual remains, why are they not openly studied today? If the stories are false, why do references keep appearing in old accounts? If the skulls were simply normal or artificially elongated, where are the casts, photographs, reports, and measurements that would settle the matter? AI cannot conjure lost bones. It can only show where the questions repeat. The AI model compared the Malta anomaly reports with documented cranial deformation cases worldwide. It flagged the need for caution. Some descriptions from older writers use imprecise language. Terms like elongated, robust, abnormal, and peculiar can mean many things depending on observer, period, and expectation. A 19th or early 20th century writer may exaggerate what a modern osteologist would classify calmly. Yet the model also found that the Maltese reports cluster around specific underground and temple contexts, especially the Hypogeum. That clustering is what keeps the story alive. If the claims were only random rumors, they would drift everywhere. Instead, they seem repeatedly drawn back to the carved underworld. The Hypogeum, a place where stone chambers held thousands of dead. A place carved downward into limestone. A place with levels, niche, alcoves, ritual spaces, and acoustics so strange that even modern researchers approach them with measured language. The bones and the underworld are linked. But before we descend fully, stay for a moment with the fragility of evidence. Stone remains because it is large. Bone remains because luck allows it. Paper remains because someone thought it mattered. Photographs remain because the archive does not flood, burn, move, or forget. The past survives through many small permissions. Remove one, and the chain breaks. The AI archive model rated the Malta bone problem not as proof of giants, but as an evidentiary instability zone. That phrase is cold, almost ugly, but useful. It means the data around a claim are not strong enough for certainty, yet too recurrent to dismiss casually. It means the record is unstable. Something happened in the archive. Something was claimed. Something failed to remain available. That is the kind of mystery that unsettles researchers more than folklore does. Folklore can be enjoyed from a distance. A missing catalog chain reaches into the work itself. The source connects the skulls to the giant traditions. But cautiously we should say this. Even if elongated or robust skulls existed, they would not automatically prove giants. Large skulls do not equal giant bodies. Elongated skulls do not equal a lost race of enormous builders. Human variation is broad. Burial practices can alter appearance. Early descriptions can be wrong. Alternative writers can overreach. Yet the folklore, the architecture, and the missing remains create a triangle of pressure. One point alone is weak. Together, they keep drawing the eye. The villagers said giants built the stones. The stones seem unusually advanced and massive. The early reports say unusual remains were found, then became difficult to trace. That is why Malta feels less like a solved Neolithic chapter and more like a door left half closed. Picture now an early excavator in the Hypogeum. He descends by lamp. The air cools. The limestone walls carry moisture and dust. Niches hold bones. Not one skeleton laid out in a tidy grave, but many bonas, gathered, moved, arranged, perhaps used in rituals of death and memory we do not fully understand. Skulls rest among them, some damaged, some whole enough to measure. A lamp flame wavers, making each empty eye socket seem to shift. He lifts one skull. It feels light, too light for what it represents. He turns it. Perhaps it is longer than expected. Perhaps the jaw seems strong. Perhaps the vault shape catches his attention. He calls another man. They look. They speak in low voices because the place asks for low voices. A note is made. A number is attached. The skull joins the record. Then time begins its quieter destruction. The AI system reconstructed possible archive paths from known institutional histories. Malta changed hands administratively. Collections moved between museums and storage spaces. Excavation standards changed. The Second World War brought damage and disruption. Human remains were not always treated with the documentation expected today. Some items may have been separated from context. Some records may have been revised after later interpretations changed. This is not glamorous. It is exactly how evidence disappears. A box is moved. A label is lost. A new curator inherits uncertainty. A sensational claim becomes embarrassing. A cautious institution says less. Then silence hardens. What makes the silence darker is that the Hypogeum itself is not silent. It is full of sound behavior. It has chambers that amplify, passages that carry vibration, spaces that seem cut not only for bodies of the dead, but for voices of the living. If unusual skulls were found there, then the remains would belong not just to a cemetery, but to a ritual, sound world. A place where anatomy, architecture, and acoustics might have met. The AI cross-referenced cranial claims with acoustic studies and chamber locations where possible. The available data were incomplete, but the model kept returning to the same interpretive possibility. The Hypogeum may have selected, shaped, or intensified ritual experience. The people placed there were not merely disposed of. They were part of an underworld technology of memory. That phrase sounds modern, but the feeling is ancient. An underworld technology of memory. Stone chambers. Bones. Echo. Voice. Darkness. A dead community held inside a carved body of limestone. If some of those bones belonged to people later remembered as giants, the implications would be enormous. If they did not, the Hypogeum remains enormous anyway. It is one of the great underground monuments of prehistory, and its dead deserve more than rumor. They deserve clarity. But clarity has been delayed. The source asks why. Was it simple loss? Was it incompetence? Was it war? Was it reclassification? Was it institutional fear of feeding sensational claims? Was it an effort to keep Malta inside a safe story of peaceful Neolithic farmers and ritual tombs? We cannot know. The fair answer is that multiple causes may overlap, yet the result is still a gap. And gaps in Malta tend to echo. By now, the fire in our room is very low. The candle trembles near the edge of its wax. Imagine one final time the old archive drawer. It opens with a wooden scrape. Inside, there should be a skull, or a cast, or a photograph, or at least a clear chain of notes. Instead, there is a label without the thing, or a thing without the label, or a note referring to another note no one can find. That is not proof. It is worse for sleep. It is uncertainty with a human shape. The stones above ground are patient. They can wait another 1,000 years. Bone cannot always wait. Paper cannot always wait. The archive may already have lost what the island once gave it. So the story moves downward now. From the giantess carrying stone, from the megaliths resisting explanation, from the vanished skulls and unstable evidence, down into the Hypogeum itself, where the walls were cut by human hands, where the dead were gathered in their thousands, where sound seems to move like a living thing, and where Malta stops feeling like an island and begins to feel like an underworld. The entrance to the Hypogeum does not look like the mouth of an ancient underworld. That is part of its power. It sits beneath modern Malta with a restraint that almost feels deliberate. Streets pass above it. Houses stand near it. Ordinary footsteps cross the surface. And beneath them, the limestone has been hollowed into chambers that do not belong to daylight. The island keeps its deepest voice under the habits of daily life. You step down from the sun. At first, the change is simple. The air cools. The light thins. Street sound fades behind you, not all at once, but in layers A car outside becomes a murmur. A human voice becomes a blur. Then even that is gone, and the stone begins to take over the senses. Limestone has its own silence. It is not empty. It is dense. It presses close without moving. The AI models began here too, not with imagination, but with scans. Researchers fed laser maps, old plans, chamber dimensions, floor levels, acoustic readings, and excavation notes into a neural network built to compare underground ritual spaces across the ancient world. It studied tombs, gabbas, sanctuaries, catacombs, rock-cut temples, and natural chambers altered by human hands. The Hypogeum did not behave like a simple burial pit. It behaved like a carved system. That word matters. System. A tomb can hold the dead. A system does more. It guides the living. It controls movement. It shapes sound. It limits light. It changes breath, posture, and attention. It teaches the body how to feel before the mind decides what the place means. The first level is the easiest to accept. It feels nearer the world above. Niche, chambers, carved spaces, stone that has been worked but still keeps some softness in the eye. You can imagine people entering with lamps, carrying offerings, bones, vessels, memories of the dead. The air would have held smoke, oil, dust, and the mineral smell of opened limestone. A hand touches the wall. Cool, slightly damp, not wet exactly, but old in a way that feels physical. The stone does not feel carved yesterday, or even carved by people you can easily imagine. It feels as though human hands began the work, and then time finished it slowly, smoothing sharp intentions into something heavier. The passage narrows. Your shoulders understand before your thoughts do. You move more carefully. A narrow passage is not only an architectural feature, it changes the body. It lowers the voice. It makes the head turn slowly. It makes the breath smaller. It turns walking into permission. This is where the Hypogeum begins to become more than a place. It becomes an experience. The second level opens into more complex chambers. Here the carving feels deliberate in a deeper sense. Rooms widen, then close again. Openings appear where the eye does not expect them. Pillars and walls are cut from the same living limestone, not assembled block by block, but released from the rock by removal. This is architecture by subtraction. The builders did not bring stone here. They took stone away until space appeared. That is a dark thought. A temple above ground grows by addition. A block placed on another block. A wall rising. Alintelset. But an underground temple grows by loss. The chamber exists because stone was removed. The sacred form is made from absence. The AI scan highlighted this. It identified zones where carving effort exceeded what would be needed for storage or simple burial. It flagged symmetry, repeated chamber shapes, acoustic pockets, and sightlines that seem to guide ritual motion. It noted that some spaces imitate above-ground temples, as though the builders carved a shadow version of the living architecture into the island itself. A temple for the dead, or for the living to meet the dead, or for something between. We cannot be sure. The source treats the Hypogeum as a ritual underworld, and that is not an unreasonable feeling. Thousands of human remains were reportedly found there, yet the space does not feel like a mere deposit of bodies. It feels ordered, layered, controlled. The dead were not simply hidden away. They were brought into a carved memory. Imagine a procession entering by lamplight. No electric glow, no safety railing, no tourist path, only small flames cupped in bowls or lamps, moving slowly through stone. The light touches one wall and leaves another in dark. A footstep sounds, then returns faintly from somewhere ahead. Someone carries a bundle of bones. Someone carries pigment. Someone carries a bowl. The air is close. The living walk deeper with the dead. The Hypogeum has levels, and descent changes the mind. The first steps downward may feel like curiosity. The next feel like commitment. Deeper still, the body begins to understand that sunlight is no longer part of the agreement. There are chambers that feel almost womb-shaped, and others that feel like ears. Curves gather sound. Niches hold shadow. Spirals carved or painted in related temple contexts suggest movement, return, cycle, perhaps altered states, perhaps the journey of life and death. The source sees intention everywhere. Academic caution asks for restraint. But even restraint must admit that the place is not casual. The AI models traced airflow, too. Air moving through an underground complex can reveal voids, blocked passages, and hidden connections. Small changes in temperature and flow can suggest chambers beyond visible walls. Some modern reports and alternative researchers claim that unseen spaces remain behind sealed areas. Official access is limited, partly for conservation and safety. Too many visitors can damage the fragile underground environment. That explanation is real. It matters. But the older maps and reports make the limits feel more charged. Because in Malta, restricted space is never just restricted space. It becomes a question. The third level is more unsettling. Some areas are inaccessible or restricted. Some accounts say deeper spaces were once mapped, entered, or at least suspected. The AI comparison between older diagrams and modern public plans found discrepancies in how certain passages and chamber extensions were represented. Some could be correction. Some could be simplification. Some could reflect unsafe or collapsed sections removed from visitor materials. But the pattern feeds the unease. The underworld seems to have lost rooms as it became more official. You stand at a lower threshold. The air is heavier. Sound seems to die faster, then return from another angle. Your own breath becomes a private instrument. The limestone holds the coolness of centuries. Dust lies where feet no longer pass. A sealed area is not dramatic to look at. Often it is only a wall, a barrier, a closed passage, a refusal made of stone or policy. but the mind feels what it cannot enter more strongly than what it can. That is human. The forbidden chamber grows larger in imagination. The source describes hidden alcoves and sealed depths, and places where the old maps hint at more than the modern route allows. It asks whether the hypogeum we visit is only the polite upper sentence of a much longer paragraph. The AI could not prove this. It could only compare geometry, old map features, air behavior, and acoustic anomalies. Its answer was careful, but not dismissive. There may be more spaces than the visible path suggests. There may have been more in the past. Or there may have been claims produced by confusion, damage, and the natural tendency of underground places to multiply stories. Both possibilities are alive in the dark. A chamber appears ahead, and the walls shift in tone. The stone is smoother in some places. It has been touched by hands, tools, breath, and perhaps ritual sound. Niches hold absence where bones once rested. The idea of thousands of dead in this carved place is difficult to carry. Not because of horror. We will not make it graphic. It is difficult because numbers become weight. One body is grief. Thousands become a civilization speaking in silence. The AI model estimated movement through the complex. It simulated how many people could pass, gather, show, carry lamps, place remains, and return. It showed that the hypogeum is not efficient for simple disposal. Its paths create sequence, delay, compression, release. These are ritual properties. They make people feel transformed by passage. You walk. The floor is uneven. A foot must test before trusting. The air smells of old limestone, dust, and the faint, dry mineral scent of a place sealed too long from weather. Your fingertips brush the wall, not hard, because such places ask not to be handled roughly. The wall seems to take warmth from the skin. A guide in a modern visit may speak softly here. Even official voices lower themselves. No one needs to be told. The stone does the telling. There are reports, old and new, of whispers, strange footsteps, sensations of presence, and sounds traveling in ways people cannot easily place. Some are likely explainable. Underground acoustics can mislead the ear. A footstep in one chamber may appear to come from another. A voice can reflect along curved stone. A breath can sound like movement. Fear adds its own architecture. Yet the place was built by people who likely understood some of these effects. Maybe not in modern physics. In ritual experience. That is enough. A people who work with stone for generations learn where a voice returns. They learn which chamber deepens a chant. They learn where a lamp makes a wall seem alive. They learn which corridor makes the heart slow because the ceiling lowers and the air cools. They do not need equations to design feeling. Modern AI can map the effect, but ancient bodies found it first. That may be the most humbling part. The machine measures what the builders could feel. Now the passage draws you toward the oracle room. The name is modern, but the chamber deserves a name with weight. It is the place where sound becomes body, researchers have tested its acoustic behavior, and the source centers one detail above all others. A male voice around 110 hertz can resonate through the chamber in a way that seems to spread beyond ordinary hearing. 110 hertz. A low tone. Not a scream. Not a song, necessarily. More like a controlled voice entering stone and being returned by stone. Before entering, pause at the threshold. The darkness inside feels different. The chamber does not threaten. It waits. The wall curves. A niche or opening seems ready to receive sound. The air seems still, but not asleep. Somewhere above, modern Malta continues with daylight. Chaos, footsteps, traffic, ordinary errands. Down here, the older island listens. This is the turning point. The Hypogeum has brought us from sunlight to stone, from temple to tomb, from architecture to underworld. The next secret is not a missing map or a vanished skull. It is vibration. A voice entering limestone. A chamber answering through the bones of the listener. The fire beside us is low. The candle is steady. We stand now in the carved dark, and the stone is about to speak back. The oracle room is not frightening at first. That is what makes it more powerful. It is small compared with the size of the mystery around it. Limestone walls, carved surfaces, shadowed edges, a chamber shaped by hands that understood more about sound than they left in words. There is no monster in the room, no inscription explaining everything, no carved warning telling the visitor what to believe. There is only stone, air, and a place where the human voice changes when it is given to the wall. A researcher stands inside with a recorder. No torch now. No ancien lamp. Only modern instruments. Sensitive microphones. Frequency monitors. Portable scanners. And the quiet tension that comes when science enters a sacred place. The researcher lowers the voice. A tone is produced around 110 hertz. Not loud. Not dramatic. Low. Controlled. Almost humble. The sound enters the chamber. Then the chamber returns it. It is felt before it is understood. The vibration seems to gather in the chest, then the jaw, then the back of the skull. The air thickens. But the wall does not echo in the ordinary way. It holds the tone and gives it body. Some listeners report a sensation of pressure, emotional change, presence, altered focus, or a strange inward calm. The source leans toward ritual trance. Science uses more careful language. But both agree on one thing. The chamber has unusual acoustic behavior. When researchers fed the acoustic readings into an AI sound model, the system compared the oracle room with caves, cathedrals, burial chambers, temples, and purpose-built resonance spaces. It found that the Maltese chamber produces an effect that would be difficult to ignore in ritual use. The sound is not an accident in the casual sense. Whether the builders mathematically designed it or discovered it through repeated practice, the room seems tuned for the human body. That is an unsettling phrase. Tuned for the human body. A stone chamber is not supposed to know your ribs. And yet, Stand there and imagine a voice. A low male chant begins in the niche. The tone moves outward. It does not simply travel through air. It seems to enter the rock and return from several places at once. People gathered in adjacent spaces may feel the sound before they locate it. A child might think the dead are speaking. An elder might understand that the chamber has opened. A priest or ritual specialist might use the tone to guide minds into stillness. The AI model suggested that at around 110 Hz, the resonance could enhance emotional intensity and bodily awareness. Some modern studies have explored how low-frequency sound may influence brain activity, attention, and mood. Claims must be treated carefully. The chamber is not a magic machine, but sound affects the body. Everyone knows this before science names it. A drum can steady walking. A lullaby can slow breathing. A low voice in darkness can make the skin listen. In the Hypogeum, that effect is carved into stone. The source goes further. It asks whether the chamber may have been designed for voices different from ours. Deeper voices, larger chests, taller bodies. The idea connects to the giant traditions and the missing skulls. If a people of larger stature used the chamber, perhaps their natural vocal range matched the resonance more easily. This is speculation. It cannot be stated as fact. But the AI did test the possibility by modeling vocal tract ranges, chamber response, and projected sound intensity. The result was cautious. A deeper voice uses the room more naturally. That does not prove giants. Many ordinary male voices can reach the range. Trained chanting can reach it. Ritual specialists could have learned to produce it. Still, the thought lingers. If myth speaks of larger builders, and architecture seems oversized in places, and the oracle room responds so strongly to low resonance, then the pattern leans again toward the same shadow. Not certainty. Pressure. The chamber turns breath into evidence of intention. Close your eyes inside it. A person speaks a low vowel. The sound begins as throat, becomes air, becomes stone, becomes body. It passes through the listener in waves so gentle they might be mistaken for emotion. The darkness does the rest. There is no horizon underground. No sky to anchor the eye. The mind has fewer places to escape. Sound fills the missing sky. This is how ritual works on the body. Not by argument, by environment. Stone presses close. Light is small. Air is cool. Footsteps vanish behind you. The dead are near. A low voice arrives from a chamber you cannot fully see. The body receives the message before belief forms. The AI visualized the sound as waves moving through the Hypogeum, bright lines pulsing along chambers, narrowing in passages, widening in rooms, concentrating in certain cavities. On the screen, it looked almost alive. A stone underworld breathing through a voice. Ancient builders had no screen. They had ears, chests, fear, reverence, memory, and repeated experience. That may have been enough. Then the story shifts from acoustic mystery to human testimony. The name Lois Jessup appears in the source as one of the most haunting modern witnesses. She was reportedly visiting the Hypogeum in the 20th century, a curious observer in a place already wrapped in rumor. She was said to have noticed or accessed a passage above or beyond the ordinary route, climbing or looking into a forbidden opening with a flashlight. Here we must be careful. Her account is disputed. Details vary. It is not treated as standard archaeological evidence, but it has become part of the legend because it fits the deeper pattern of the site. Sealed passages. Tall figures. A guide alarmed by what she saw. A route later closed. The story feels as if the Hypogeum briefly revealed another layer, then shut again. Imagine the moment as the source tells it. A narrow opening. A ledge or passage beyond the expected path. The air cooler there, perhaps, or moving differently. Lois raises the flashlight. The beam cuts through dust and blackness. It does not fill the space. It only wounds the dark for a moment. The light reaches deeper than a visitor is meant to see. At first, there is stone, then depth, then shapes. Tall figures, standing or moving slowly in the darkness. Not rushing, not speaking, not behaving like ghosts in a cheap story. That is what makes the account so disturbing. The figures are said to be calm, present, large, seen only briefly, enough for the mind to recoil before it can organize what it has seen. The guide reacts with concern. The moment ends. The passage later becomes inaccessible, or at least no longer part of the public route. That is one explanation. But it did not close the story, because the reported passage itself becomes important. If a visitor saw something beyond an accessible route, and that route was later sealed or omitted, then the question shifts from what she saw to what spaces once existed. Early maps become relevant. Old accounts become relevant. Airflow becomes relevant. So does the pattern of rooms appearing in one record and vanishing in another. The Hypogeum is no longer only a chamber of resonance. It becomes a site of controlled access. Modern conservation requires controlled access. That must be said clearly. The Hypogeum is fragile. Breath, humidity, bacteria, vibration, and crowding can damage ancient surfaces. Restricting visitors can be responsible stewardship. Not every closed passage hides a conspiracy. Some closed passages simply protect stone from human harm. Yet the source argues that Malta contains too many closures, too many missing records, too many vanished remains, too many simplified diagrams, to accept every absence as neutral. The AI archive system compared public maps over time. It found that some older representations included passages or zones not shown in modern visitor diagrams. Some differences may reflect correction or safety exclusions. Others are less clear. When those map changes are placed beside the Lois Jessup story, the acoustic anomalies, and the reports of missing skulls, the underworld grows more complicated. A sealed passage is a powerful object in the human imagination. It is only a closed place. Yet it gathers every unanswered question. What lies beyond it? Why is it closed? Who entered before? What did they remove? What did they decide not to show? Evidence for a vast tunnel network remains uncertain. Some claims are exaggerated. Some passages may be natural fissures, later cavities, collapsed drains, wartime shelters, or ordinary underground works confused with ancient routes. The AI geological model warned against over-connecting every void. Limestone islands contain cavities. Human history adds cisterns, quarries, catacombs, wells, shelters, and cut passage. A hollow sound behind a wall is not automatically prehistoric. A cold draft is not automatically a lost temple corridor. Still, some anomalies deserve examination. The model mapped reported airflow and underground temperature stability. It suggested that a few sealed or restricted areas may connect to larger voids than public maps imply. This is not proof of hidden giants. It is an invitation to look carefully. Carefully is the word that keeps the story honest. The oracle room teaches that the builders knew how to use what the body feels, but cannot easily explain. Resonance, darkness, compression, descent. If a person emerges from such a place and reports seeing figures in forbidden dark, the account may be psychological, but psychology does not mean meaningless. Ritual spaces are built to alter perception. The line between vision and environment is never simple underground. A low tone still seems to vibrate in the walls. You stand beside Lois in imagination, not to prove her story, but to feel the kind of place that could produce it. The flashlight beam narrows. Dust floats. The passage recedes. Stone absorbs the small sounds of movement. Then something tall seems to stand where no one should be. For one suspended breath, the modern world falls away. No museum labels. No guide script. No approved diagram. Only limestone, darkness, and the sensation that the island has not shown all its rooms. That sensation becomes the bridge to the next mystery. Maps. Because if the chamber can hide sound, and the passage can be closed, then perhaps the underworld can change on paper too. Perhaps a corridor can exist in one decade and disappear from another. Perhaps the public Hypogeum is not the same as the excavator's Hypogeum. Perhaps the island has been edited, not only in story, but in lines and diagrams. The AI did not whisper. It did not dream. It compared drawings, and the drawings did not agree. The fire in our room has become soft and red. The candlelight barely reaches the corners. We leave the oracle room with its low stone voice still moving somewhere behind the ribs. We leave the flashlight beam at the sealed threshold. We leave the tall figures unresolved, as they must remain. Ahead, the mystery becomes colder. Not because of what was seen, because of what was removed from the map. Old maps are dangerous things in a place like Malta. They look harmless at first. Thin lines on yellowed paper. A room here. A corridor there. A note written in careful handwriting by someone who believed the shape of the underworld could be held flat on a page. Yet every map is also a decision. What to include? What to simplify? What to leave unnamed? What to call unsafe? What to forget? The artificial intelligence did not begin with fear. It began with alignment. Researchers scanned early plans of the Hypogeum, old excavation sketches, visitor diagrams, archival references, and modern public layouts. The model corrected distortions from paper age, camera angle, and printing scale. It placed one map over another, like transparent skins laid under a cold lamp. At first, the differences seemed ordinary. Old maps are messy. Early explorers make mistakes. Underground spaces are difficult to draw. Then the differences gathered. A passage shown faintly in one plan was absent in another. A deeper route appeared in an early description, then became a blank area in later diagrams. A chamber was labeled vaguely, then removed from public representation. Branching spaces became clean walls. Lower levels became simplified. Areas once hinted at as accessible, suspected, or explored became conservation zones, collapsed spaces, or nothing at all. None of this proves concealment. But it does show editing, and editing becomes unsettling when the edited place is already full of missing skulls. Acoustic anomaly and sealed passages. Imagine the maps spread on a wooden table at night. A researcher leans over them while a neural network marks mismatches in pale light. The room is quiet except for the faint hum of a computer and rain tapping against glass. On one screen, old lines glow over modern lines. The shape of the underworld seems to breathe, expanding in the past, contracting in the present. A corridor exists. Then it does not. A lower chamber is suggested. Then it vanishes. A route bends into darkness. Then the darkness is replaced by a neat boundary. The machine is not frightened. It only marks the inconsistency. A human looking at the screen feels something else. The feeling is not certainty. It is suspicion beginning to form around absence. The source frames this as narrative control. That phrase has weight. It does not have to mean a sinister plan by a single person in a locked room. Narrative control can be softer, cleaner. Savoir. A fragile site becomes difficult to explain, so the public version is simplified. Dangerous tunnels are removed from visitor maps. Unverified spaces are left out. Controversial remains are not discussed. Acoustic effects are described carefully. Legends are dismissed. The result is not necessarily a lie, but it is not the full texture either. A clean map can make a complicated place look obedient. The Hypogeum has never felt obedient. Old reports speak of lower passages, sealed corridors, locked routes, hidden chambers, and places where air moved from unseen spaces. Some claims come from alternative writers and must be handled with caution. Some may come from misreadings of old plans. Some may confuse the Hypogeum with other underground Maltese features. Wells, cisterns, wartime shelters, quarries, catacombs, or natural cavities in limestone. Malta is honeycombed by history. Not every hollow belongs to the Temple Age. Still, the AI flagged a small set of reports that clustered around specific zones rather than drifting randomly. Airflow, hollow sounds, old chamber references, restricted areas, acoustic behavior. These did not prove a secret city. They suggested that the visible hypogeum may be a curated fraction of a larger and more confusing underground reality. Curated is not always wrong, but it is always a choice. Walk with me now through a corridor that appears on an old plan. The lamp is low. The limestone walls are close. The ceiling drops enough that the body lowers without thinking. Dust rests where no tourist foot has passed in decades. At the end, a barrier stands. It is plain, practical, a modern intervention in an ancient throat. Beyond it, darkness continues, or seems to. You tap the wall lightly. The sound is dull in one place, hollow in another. This is the kind of detail that makes legends grow. A hollow wall may hide a chamber, or it may only hide the natural inconsistency of limestone. The human ear wants meaning. The stone does not help. It gives back just enough to keep listening. The source describes people hearing faint voices, tapping, movement, or echoes from sealed areas. In most cases, we should first consider natural acoustics. Underground sound is deceptive. Voices carry through cracks. Footsteps travel along stone. A door can rattle from pressure changes. Air can move through tiny passages and make sounds that seem almost intentional. But after the oracle room, even natural sound feels less innocent. The builders made a place where voice becomes presence. Later listeners entering that place may hear the architecture before they hear any ghost. The hypogeum itself may be the haunting, not a spirit, a design. Then the story turns human. The schoolchildren legend. It sits at the edge of record and fear. And for that reason, it must be told gently. Versions differ. Some place the event in the late 1920s, others in the early 1930s. Some say children were on a school visit. Some say they entered a deeper passage. Some say teachers or guides take track of them. Some claim that voices were later heard from below, crying or calling through stone. Official records do not clearly confirm the dramatic versions, and parts of the story may be local legend, rumor, or a blending of different incidents. Still, the legend has endured. A story survives because it gives shape to a fear a community cannot settle. Picture the children arriving in daylight. Their shoes make small sounds on the stone. They are excited because underground places make children feel brave until the dark becomes too real. A guide speaks. A teacher counts heads. The entrance swallows street noise. The group descends into coolness, into carved chambers where voices return strangely. At first it is educational. Then it is quieter. A child touches a wall and is told not to. Another whispers and hears the whisper come back from a place no one is standing. A lamp flickers. The teacher tries to keep order. Children do what children have always done. They drift toward edges, toward openings, toward the one passage adults seem not to notice quickly enough. In the legend, a group enters or falls into a side passage. The passage narrows. The light behind them weakens. Their voices grow smaller as they move away. Then they do not return. The image is terrible because it is so simple. No monster appears. No violence is needed. Only limestone, confusion, darkness, and the failure of a corridor to lead back where children expect it to lead. Families gather later at the entrance. Night deepens above the island. People call names into stone. Searchers move through the known chambers. The known chambers are not enough. Someone says they hear crying from below. Someone says it comes from behind a blocked area. Someone says the sound fades after days. Another version denies this entirely. The uncertainty itself becomes the wound. A confirmed tragedy has dates, names, and graves. A legend has echoes. The AI archive model searched newspapers, local accounts, latter retellings, official summaries, and references to restrictions following underground incidents. It did not find a clean record that proves the full legend as told in its darkest form. It did find that accounts of disappearances, sealed passages, and public access restrictions cluster in the same cultural memory surrounding the Hypogeum. The machine could not verify the children. It could only show that the story attached itself to existing anxieties about the underground. That distinction matters. A false detail can grow around a true fear. A true incident can become myth when records fail. An institutional denial can be correct and still leave a community unconvinced if the place already feels edited. The source uses the school children's story as the human center of the Hypogeum mystery. Missing skulls are evidence. Missing maps are suspicion. Missing children are grief. Even if the legend is uncertain, its emotional truth is clear. The sealed underworld is not only an archaeological problem. It is a place where people imagine loss without answer. In the dim corridor, that matters. The stone has already swallowed sound once through its acoustic design. It is not difficult for the mind to imagine it swallowing names. Modern officials would say safety restrictions protect visitors. Conservation specialists would agree. Unstable chambers, fragile surface, limited oxygen, narrow routes, and preservation needs are real. Responsible archaeology must limit access. A site can be destroyed by curiosity. That truth should be honored. But the source asks why limitation and loss seem to occur around every inconvenient layer. The skulls are not available. The deeper passages are sealed. The old maps do not match. The giant legends are dismissed. The acoustic chamber is treated as fascinating, but contained. The schoolchildren's story is blurred into rumor. Each item alone can be explained. Together, they feel like a pattern. This is where the AI analysis becomes valuable, not because it proves the sensational claim, but because it refuses to look at each anomaly in isolation. It clusters them. It shows relationships. It asks whether the same zones of the site appear repeatedly in different kinds of uncertainty. If missing remains, altered maps, acoustic features, and sealed passages all orbit the same deeper areas, then those areas deserve more transparent study. Not wild conclusions. Transparent study. The old maps on the table become a kind of moral object. They remind us that public history is often a simplified route through a larger ruin. Sometimes, simplification is necessary. Sometimes it protects. Sometimes it hides. Often it does both. The Hypogeum remains beneath modern Malta, cool and patient. The tourist path is lit. The restricted spaces stay dark. The published diagrams show enough to guide, not enough to end the questions. Somewhere in the archive, perhaps, there are notes no one has connected. Somewhere in storage, perhaps, a mislabeled box. Somewhere behind a sealed wall, perhaps, nothing at all. Or a chamber, or a passage, or the answer to a question nobody in authority wants to ask too loudly. We should not turn uncertainty into certainty. That would disrespect the dead. But we should not turn uncertainty into dismissal either. That would disrespect the evidence that vanished, the maps that changed, and the stories that survived because people felt something had been left unresolved. The fire beside us is nearly ash now. The candle is low. We leave the children in the legend without forcing their story to become fact. We leave the old maps open on the table. We leave the sealed corridors sealed. For now, the underworld does not give itself all at once. It gives pressure. It gives fragments. It gives silence shaped like a missing room. And above that silence, Malta sleeps under moonlight, while the lines of the old maps continue downward where the modern page grows clean. By the end of the trail, Malta has not become easier to explain. It has become quieter. That often happens with real mysteries. At first, they feel loud, crowded with claims, vanished skulls, giant stories, sealed corridors, altered maps, low frequencies, missing children, and stones too old for comfort. But if you sit with them long enough, the noise falls away. What remains is not certainty. It is a shape, the shape of something missing. Modern archaeology prefers clean shapes. It has to. A discipline cannot survive on rumor. It needs dates, layers, tools, bones, carbon samples, peer review, careful excavation, and claims that can stand in daylight. That caution is necessary. Without it, every shadow becomes a civilization, and every echo becomes a voice from the dead. Yet caution can also become a wall. The source argues that Malta was fitted into a standard Neolithic farmer model because that model was safe, orderly, and professionally manageable. Farmers came from Sicily. They settled the island. Over time, they built temples. They used the Hypogeum for burial and ritual. Their society declined. Later, people forgot the details and made legends. That story may be mostly correct. It may also be incomplete. The newest AI comparison did not overthrow the model. It complicated it. It showed that Malta contains several kinds of anomaly at once. Architectural discontinuity, folklore tied directly to megalithic construction, reports of unusual remains with unstable archive trails, underground acoustic design, discrepant maps, restricted passages, local legends of disappearance, possible submerged prehistoric landscapes around the island. No single thread proves a hidden race of giants. But many threads suggest that the standard story may have been trimmed too cleanly. Imagine a museum drawer. Inside it should be a bone, but there is only a note. Imagine a map showing a corridor. Then a later map where the corridor is gone. Imagine a temple whose first visible form already knows how to curve stone into ritual space. Imagine villagers naming it Giant Tower because ordinary memory cannot find ordinary builders. Imagine an underground chamber tuned to a tone that enters the body like a hand placed gently against the chest. A responsible scholar says, "Be careful." A responsible storyteller says, "Listen anyway." The AI helped by doing what human imagination often cannot do calmly. It held all the fragments at once. It did not need to choose instantly between official history and forbidden history. It could rank evidence, weigh patterns, flag gaps, connect archives, simulate stone movement, compare acoustics, and rebuild drowned coastlines in probability rather than myth. Its conclusion was not sensational. That is what made it interesting. Malta is not solved. Malta is underexplained. That is the word to carry now. Underexplained. Not fake. Not proven. Not a conspiracy in need of shouting. Underexplained. A small island where the visible remains exceed the clarity of the story built around them. The Hypogeum remains the strongest witness because stone is harder to misplace than bone. It cannot be conveniently lost in a drawer. It cannot be reclassified out of existence. It cannot be made to stop resonating by a footnote. Its chambers are still there, carved into limestone, holding cool air, controlled silence, strange sound, and the memory of thousands of dead. Stone does not tell us everything, but it refuses to disappear. The temples above ground do the same. Gugantija, Hagarkim, Manaidra, Darksien. Their stones remain under sun, wind, rain, and salt air. Tourists pass through them. Scholars measure them. Guides explain them. Yet behind every explanation, the stones keep a remainder, a sense that the island's earliest architecture arrived with knowledge already formed. The AI models were asked to compare Malta with other ancient enigmas. Göbekli Tepe, where monumental ritual architecture appears very early in Anatolia. Teotihuacan, a city whose builders remain debated. Andean megaliths, where stone fitting still humbles modern eyes. Egypt, where the visible development is clearer, but the scale still invites wonder. Sumerian king lists, where impossible reigns may encode mythic time. Dynastic memory, or something stranger. North American mound traditions, where early reports of unusual remains became tangled with bad science. Colonial bias, and missing documentation. Pacific oral histories, where sea level change and old lands lost to water remain alive in story. The model did not say all these places share one lost civilization. That would be too simple. It said they share a pattern. Human memory often preserves breaks in history as myth. Rising seas erase coastlines. Later cultures inherit stonework. Bodies and archives vanish. Official narratives prefer linear development. Oral traditions keep figures too large for the accepted frame. Giants, watchers, founders, long-lived kings, ancestors from before the flood, stone builders who came, built, and disappeared. Pattern is not proof, but pattern is not nothing. Malta may be one small part of a wider prehistoric problem. After the Ice Age, seas rose, coasts drowned, populations moved. Knowledge may have survived unevenly, carried by refugees, specialists, ritual lineages, or small groups whose original homelands now lie underwater. Some of this is accepted in broad environmental terms. Coastlines did drown. People did move. Cultures did adapt. The speculative part is whether some advanced building knowledge came from those lost coastal worlds and appeared suddenly in places like Malta. We cannot know yet, but the idea no longer sounds absurd when geological models show how much ancient shoreline vanished. The sea around Malta becomes a character in the story. Not merely blue water. A cover. A keeper. A thief. The AI sea level simulations showed earlier landscapes stretching where waves now move. If people live there, their hearths are gone. If they built with perishable materials, nothing obvious remains. If stone structures stood near the old coast, they may be broken, buried, or waiting under sediment. The first chapters may be underwater. The next chapters may be sealed underground. The later chapters are the temples under the sun. That is Malta in 3 layers. Sea, underworld, stone, and between them, human memory tried to explain what official memory could not. So it made Sansuna, a giantess with broad beans in her hand, a figure absurd enough to be legend and ordinary enough to feel remembered. It made giant towers. It made stories of tunnels and vanished children. It made fear around sealed doors. It made the island feel inhabited by an earlier size of human possibility. The final question is not whether every legend is literally true. Most are not. The question is why the legends keep growing exactly where the evidence becomes unstable. If there were no massive temples, Sansuna would fade. If there were no Hypogeum, tunnel stories would lose their root. If there were no missing bone reports, giant folklore would remain only folklore. If there were no acoustic chamber, the underworld would feel less designed to alter the body. If there were no map discrepancies, sealed passages would feel less charged. Each piece feeds the others. That is why the story endures. So source suggests that institutional caution may have shaded into exclusion, not necessarily malice, perhaps fear of sensationalism, perhaps embarrassment over poor early methods, perhaps the desire to protect the Hypogeum from crowds and damage, perhaps the need to keep Malta inside a clear national heritage narrative. All of these are human motives, some defensible, some not, all capable of making history smoother than the past itself. The past is not smooth. It is broken pottery, disturbed burials, lost maps, old politics, vanished coastlines, folklore, pride, error, and stone that outlives every argument. A final AI run was given all the layers together: architecture, folklore, archive instability, acoustic data, geology, site distribution, map discrepancies. It returned a heat map of unresolved zones, not only physical zones beneath the island, but interpretive zones where evidence clusters and certainty drops. The brightest area lay around the same old convergence: the temples, the Hypogeum, the sealed or disputed passages, the missing remains, the legends of larger builders. Again, not proof, but enough to make the island feel less like a solved chapter and more like a closed book with pages pressed together. Now imagine Malta at night. The tourists are gone. The buses have stopped. The sea moves below the cliffs with its dark, patient breath. Above ground, the temple stones cool under moonlight. Their shadows fill the chambers like water. The doorways are black. The altars stand empty. The wind carries dry grass against limestone. Below modern streets, the Hypogeum rests. No crowds now. No guide voice. No camera. Only limestone chambers, sealed passages, resonance sleeping in the walls, niches emptied or left in silence, old roots perhaps forgotten, perhaps protected, perhaps hidden, because even truth can damage a fragile place if it arrives too roughly. The oracle room is quiet, but a quiet room is not a dead room. It waits for a voice. Somewhere in the archive, perhaps, a mislabeled box still exists. Somewhere in an unpublished note, perhaps, a measurement waits. Somewhere behind a sealed wall, perhaps, there is only stone, or air, or a chamber where the map should have continued. The honest ending keeps all of these possibilities open without forcing any one of them to become certainty. That is the sleep of the mystery. Not solved. Not abandoned. Resting. The fire beside us has gone low. The candle is almost finished. We have followed the island from the temples above, to the giantess in village memory, to the heavy stones, to the missing skull reports, to the carved underworld, to the 110 hertz voice, to Lois Jessup and the tall figures, to maps that do not agree, to children remembered in legend, to the wider question of lost coastlines and vanished human chapters. What remains is the feeling of limestone holding its breath. Malta may not be hiding a simple secret. It may be hiding complexity. That is harder. A simple secret can be opened like a door. Complexity must be lived with. It asks for patience, better scans, transparent archives, respectful study of remains, cautious exploration of sealed zones, underwater archaeology, and a willingness to let old stories be data without making them masters. The AI has not ended the debate. It has made the silence more visible. And perhaps that is enough for tonight. Let the island settle back into darkness. Let Sansuna put down her stone and step back into the hills. Let the old maps fold themselves without closing the question. Let the Hypogeum sleep under the streets. Let the sea cover what it has covered for thousands of years. Let the temples remain under the moon, pale and patient, refusing to explain themselves too quickly. The last image is simple. A limestone doorway at night, black inside, silver at the edge, wind moving through it like a breath from below. No answer comes, only the old pressure of the question, softened now by distance, by candlelight, by the slow turning of the earth. The island keeps its chapters. The stone keeps its silence. Good night.